And we're live. I'm here with Matthew. This is Taco Movie Talks. Thank you for joining us. This episode, we are doing John Ford, two movies by him, including John Wayne. Two movies are The Searchers and Who Shot Liberty Valance. Matt, how are you doing today, and what have you been watching this week?
I'm doing pretty well. And I mean, this week I just kind of watch a mismatch of stuff. But like last night, I watched a cool documentary about space called For All Mankind. But then besides that, the movies we're talking about today, I watched Who Shot Liberty Valance yesterday, and then I rewatched The Searchers before this podcast.
You were really high on westerns as of late. It seemed like a concerted effort to get into the westerns, like it was a subgenre, or I guess genre that had gone unnoticed for you. Like, what inspired, I guess, that thought process, and how did you kind of come to find out that, oh, I think I have been neglecting westerns and there's a lot of good stuff there?
Yeah, so a while ago, I watched a couple 40 Guns and stuff. 'Cause I was just trying to, go through like any different genres or types of movies that I'd never seen. Even like another one was musicals. Not a huge musical fan, but I'll still see if I watch some and see if I how much I like them. And I kind of did the same thing. I was watching like movies from a director, Howard Hawks, and this movie Rio Bravo. I was like,
Mm.
well, I'll just give it a shot. And it had John Wayne in it, and I think Dean Martin too. And I really liked it a lot. And so I was like, well, I'll just check out John Ford now. And so I had watched Stagecoach, and I thought it was good. But then the Searchers uh, really blew me away, and I loved like just pretty much everything about it, how cinematic it is. And then, I was like, they kind of all have similar plots, but I realized they could be great movies.
So, John Ford is definitely a name that gets thrown around a lot in the cinema space, I guess. And I think he is a huge inspiration for a lot of directors. And I know in like past conversations, I think one of the big named ones is Akira Kurosawa. And I know that you're pretty familiar with both of them, and I think that I definitely saw some of that inspiration in watching these two movies. Did you kind of see that as well, Matt?
Yeah, yeah, especially God, I'm probably gonna say this name completely wrong, but the movie Rashomon, is that it?
Yes.
From Kurosawa, I saw by far a huge similarity between them. Um, and it's just like the whole uh, town. Like there's a town. Usually, there's some bad actor in the town, or some nefarious events going on, and then there's some kind of hero, whether that be like an anti-hero or just like uh, a good guy hero that kind of, I guess, saves the day and more or less uh, in various different ways. And so yeah, so I think Kurosawa, I've read about how he took a lot of inspiration from John Ford, as well as like a ton of different classic American directors. And people would say like, oh, you could study Kurosawa's films exclusively and you still wouldn't like get all his inspirations and some crazy stuff like that.
And I think we were talking maybe a couple weeks ago, and hopefully I'm not conflating conversations, but there was a director that I think you had said they watched Stagecoach like 50 different times in preparation for one of their big films.
Yeah, that was you watched that one recently. I saw it was Orson Welles for Citizen Kane.
Oh, I had no idea. Um,
Yeah,
the cinematography and like the stage and everything in that movie, that's super high praise for someone who did such a movie like that to say, hey, this was the movie that got me in the headspace to create that. So I mean,
Yeah,
that's like a
yeah,
huge shout out to John Ford.
and seeing, I guess just comparing like the way Citizen Kane looks, especially with like John Ford movies, more so in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, because of the black and white, like the way the shadows are, at least I see, like, and how he films indoor areas, especially Citizen Kane, you can kind of tell takes inspiration from or Orson Welles in general. A lot of his movies take a lot of inspiration from John Ford and kind of the way he like moves the camera around.
I have to say, just watched Citizen Kane for the first time last night. And while I didn't give it a 5 out of 5, I gave it a 4.5. That's kind of besides the point. It was my second Orson Welles movie, but I was like, I can see why people think he's one of the best directors, and he's always named in that kind of top tier of people who advanced film, because for a 1941, if I'm getting the date right, movie, that it like sets the tone of what you can do cinematically, is like the best way I could describe that movie.
Yeah, yeah, and an interesting thing about both, like, I'd say The Searchers and Citizen Kane is that the characters, or like the protagonists in those movies, are both kind of anti-heroes. Like, it's still a super entertaining movie, but I would see like this as a huge precedent to a movie like Taxi Driver, just for example, or all these movies with like flawed protagonists that we see that are more modern, well known. I think, a lot of that, they might not have directly um, been inspired by, The Searchers, but I know Martin Scorsese, it's one of his favorite movies. So I think in a lot of instances that is the case.
And I think that sparks kind of a good question, which is, and this is me speaking personally, and I'm maybe unique, but I don't think so. There's something about the anti-hero that it becomes a more likable character than maybe like a purely like a completely pure protagonist. I mean, do you kind of look at it that way too? Are you different in that, or do you kind of agree with that?
I agree with that. Mostly because, you know, in my opinion, when you have a perfect character, a good guy who really has minor flaws, that's kind of who you're striving to be, and then the anti-hero is usually kind of more accurate of who you are, because everyone's flawed in a lot of ways. And so for me, it kind of, I can almost always just relate more to an anti-hero, because they're usually going through something or in their life, or their outlook isn't great, and there's, I can either say, oh, I've been like that in my life in the past, in this moment, but oftentimes it's hard to remember a time where I was like wholeheartedly like thought I was doing everything perfectly correct or saving the day without any faults and that and stuff like that.
I agree with you, and I feel like maybe for lack of a better term, audience members almost, I don't know if jealousy is it, but we can look at them and like discount it and be like, oh, no one's really like that. And it might come from a place that it's like, we wish we could be there, but it's so difficult in everyday life to be outstanding in every aspect of life that it almost creates an antagonist relationship and an inability to kind of see eye to eye with that character. At least that's my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And like, especially when you see characters like fail and like not just outwardly, but like inner, like failing on the inside. They don't believe themselves, and then pick themselves back up in some way, or even not. You know, at the ending for for both the protagonists in the two movies we're talking about today, they or not the protagonist, John Wayne in both movies. It's not really a great ending, you know, really for
Mm,
him. At the same time, it kind of leaves you thinking about that, and for me, I guess it's just it's a little more personal, and makes you think about the movie more than if it were just and not that, you know, great Hollywood endings are great, because they are, you know, a lot of the times, and they're fun and it leaves you feeling good. But for me, like when they end, kind of like both these movies that we're talking about today ended, I leave thinking more about the movie.
yeah. And is that something that is fairly common with John Ford movies, that it kind of ends slightly ambiguous, where it's not a purely, fairy tale ending?
Well, outside of these, I've seen few more of his movies, and I would say for the most part, yes. I mean, he's made so many films that I can't say like majority or not, and he also I've seen a lot of his that aren't westerns, but I would say that they none of them really have that like good ending where everything's kind of wrapped up in a bow, I guess you could say, and like you leave ending satisfied, but there's nothing that you might dwell on, I guess, for a long time, because it's kind of feels like the story's complete, right? But for me, like the stories kind of feel incomplete, and I tend to enjoy that more.
I agree, because same as, like, a pure protagonist and kind of a flawed anti-hero, I feel like that same logic applies to endings. And kind of going off on a tangent a little bit, it's one of the reasons why I've been more critical of, like, romantic films, because the formula that seems to be followed time after time is, there's a huge conflict kind of arises out of nowhere, and then somehow everything gets tied together perfectly, whereas it doesn't scream realism to me. And that's not my marker, or my metric for a good film, but for whatever reason, it hits me most noticeably in those films. But to bring it back to this, like, it feels deeply rooted in realism when it's not always an ending that suits everyone perfectly.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what you're saying about the romance movies, I see that too, and I think um, the good ones of those that I've seen are kind of the same way as John Ford. Like they don't all end in, you know, like a super happy they get together and together forever type ending, because that's, you know, what people would say. That's how it is in the movies, you know, not in real life. And I tend to want to connect the movie to my life more afterwards. Like that's just something I like doing. Um, and I can do that more often if it's kind of left open, and then I could be like, hey, that's, you know, like this situation in my life, or this what I went through here. And so then when I might think of that, you know, I might start thinking, oh, that's like this movie. But if it's, you know, this complete story, it usually doesn't, I guess, relate as well, because most stories and, you know, your own life don't really have beginnings and ends that are so concrete.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, another kind of strength that I've found with John Ford is his inability, or not inability, his ability to take a story that it's the wrinkles that make it so much more intriguing than it looks on the face of it. And I think these two movies are really great examples of that. We were talking about Liberty Valance. That one, I feel like every little wrinkle to that movie is what makes that story, a spectacularly written one. Do you find that to be kind of a characteristic that carries over for Ford?
Uh, so are you talking about just kind of like as the story progresses, like the little, not subplots, but events that happen in there?
Yeah, it always seems like the story's going to be very much just A to B, but he can kind of add in these little details that are great for character development and oftentimes make the ending feel a lot more suitable because it makes the characters' arcs work, but it also doesn't feel like it's out of character for anyone. Like with Liberty Valance, I felt like John Wayne's character acted very much in line with what he had done the whole movie. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and so I'll say like when I first started watching Liberty Valance, I was thinking, okay, this is probably how this movie's gonna be. Like Jimmy Stewart, after I saw him get in trouble with that with Liberty Valance, I was like, they're gonna argue, and John Wayne's gonna come in and kind of just save the day. And in a sense, that is kind of what happened. But there were so many things. It's like that character progression is the biggest for me. Kind of like, I guess, going back to like something like Taxi Driver, where the movie's about how the character kind of changes, I guess you could say. Or you see the development and those little things that happen, as it goes along, kind of show you who that person is. And another like interesting thing he does, in my opinion, is a lot of the times there's some kind of love triangle going on, or like star-crossed level lovers of some sort that can't get together. That's another interesting topic that's always just hidden in his movies.
And those relationships never feel like contrived. Maybe other viewers will feel that way, and if so, I would love to hear in the comments. But my take is it never really feels contrived, and I also feel like he is pretty great at developing those strong female characters in his movies, and I felt like they were standouts and like definitely one of the top three or like one of the more interesting main characters in both of these movies, which was, the role of the woman who was the love interest. They did spectacular, I thought, and were very well written.
Yeah, and something that was interesting about, it's more obvious that he likes or that he has a romantic interest in the second, or John Wayne's character in the second movie. And the first, or in The Searchers, or sorry, second movie being Liberty Valance. And in The Searchers, I like, he likes like his brother's wife, but you can just, it's more about like the way they act. Like the acting's good and subtle, and for me that's kind of all that you need to know that to cue it in. Like you don't get any explicit scenes of them like saying how in love with each other they are. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I kind of had a similar outlook, and I was honestly like a little bit confused because it felt like they had like a connection that went deeper, and it made me like think, okay, who is actually together amongst these three? But I completely agree with you. You could tell there was chemistry between them.
Yeah, and it's kind of saying similar kind of thing in Liberty Valance. It's more outwardly expressed that he likes her, but they still like nothing. I mean, no, nothing really. He's kind of just left, having to suck it up.
Yes, it's like you can tell he's frustrated with the situation, but at a certain point, he almost overcomes that because it's like out of character to, because that doesn't feel like something that like And I know we've said he's more of an anti-hero than a hero, but you know, he is like the charismatic leader of this group that stands for good, and it wouldn't that's it it doesn't strike me like that's the type of man he's portraying, that he would stand in the way of something that he knows is kind of out of his control. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. And also, you know, it's interesting. Then there's usually like the tough guy heroes from other movies. They almost always like get the girl in the end. And even like Jimmy Stewart's character in Liberty Valance is, you know, a lawyer, and he's supposed to be like highly educated. You would think just by the way that the town is and how the people think that John Wayne's character is kind of like the top dog, no matter, you know, how educated someone is. It doesn't seem to matter as much. Just like he kind of acts like, even though he's super flawed and you know, has clearly inner inner troubles in the Searchers. His character is kind of the same way, you know, super, you know, masculine, manly, but then has a lot of inner turmoil that's kind of displayed through his acting. Pretty much, kind of is what conveys that for me.
I'm You brought up like a really good point, and it is like, who shot Liberty Valance, with the change, or I guess the different type of characters that John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart represent. The whole tale is almost like the changing of the guard for this town, where it goes from like essentially just a wild, wild west town to like a civilized community where the value system kind of evolved from where a John Wayne would be the guy, to now it's like the intelligent, kind, uh, and caring person kind of starts to overcome and you know, be more desirable, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I like personally see myself more as the Jimmy Stewart type of person, not mostly because, you know, I just don't like you know, kind of like more pacifist, don't would rather solve stuff through some kind of nonviolent means than you know, John Wade's character who just wants to get it done, you know, what he wants in one way or the other. And so it's kind of an interesting, you know, subject and concept, seeing that character go to this town where no one even knows how to read or write yet. He's the only person because, you know, back then in the time period of the film, education was just a lot more sparse and whatnot. And so, uh, but it's interesting, especially at the ending when he seems like he wants to return there and live there because he feels some sense of, I'm thinking like a well-being or community. I don't think he doesn't strike me as someone who like wants to take advantage of people because they're, you know, uneducated or something. He seems like he has a love for the place, but then, you know, because of the events that happen at the end, he also feels somewhat undeserving, I guess, of his title and his reputation in that town, which I think is another interesting thing about the movie.
Yeah, to me, it almost feels like he's indebted to that territory, that town, because you know, obviously he had a huge conflict that was rooted there, but it made him the man that he is now.
Yeah, and you know, the whole, I mean, I guess quick spoiler warning, this is kinda like the crux of the movie. Um, but, like, the fact, you know, that John Wayne's character is actually the one that did it is kind of the kicker that really, for me, made me think a lot just about the whole movie after it was done, because it brings in this whole thing of, you know, he's taking credit, but doesn't deserve it, and you could tell that bothers him.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that line about should we print the actual news or the legend? And then they say, well, we're just going to print the legend because, like, basically, because I think they need heroes in the town and whatnot. It's interesting.
Yeah, that whole crux is like, God, I mean, that's like beautifully written, and as I was kind of thinking about it, talking to you, like it makes me want to bump up my rating even more to it, and it's like, I kind of love that story, honestly. But before we get to that, Matt, let's start with The Searchers, John Ford, 1956. This is very much about the conflict kind of between American citizens, for lack of a better term, John Wayne kind of being the strong lead, and the Comanche Indians who inhabit, this wild, wild west. Matt, what were your kind of initial thoughts about this one?
Yeah, so off the bat, I was, um, John Wayne's character in The Searchers is extremely complex, especially the way he, views just people of any other culture. In this case, it'd be Indians, or the Comanche tribe, I believe. But like that honestly is representative of, in my opinion, like people who see any other group in any capacity as like being, or ostracizing them, thinking them as different, and then, placing your like rage or whatever you're upset about onto them. And for me, that was kind of the what I took away on the first watch. Second, I kind of got a lot more out of it, but the most interesting, I think, part still for me is, how that worldview can kind of taint how you see other people and how you treat other people. But there's so much more to it. But in a brief, like what I found the most interesting, that would probably be it.
Yeah, that is obviously that's like one of the most contentious and quite frankly controversial points about this whole movie, and I think John Ford gets a lot of unnecessary slander as like a racist because of the feelings of the lead, John Wayne, towards the Comanche Indians, and even I'm not sure the relation, but the guy who has the love interest and basically goes on the complete journey with him. I think he said he's 1/8 Cherokee, and John Wayne obviously treats him differently because of that. I thought that was pointed out explicitly to be one of John Wayne's character flaws. And that ends up tying into the character arc at the very end. So I feel like people who criticize the movie based on that point alone are kind of missing some of the deeper meaning to the movie. And also, I feel like you would be remiss if you didn't include that in the movie, because it kind of harkening back, if you remember our thin red line discussion, a lot of times when you are in a combative relationship with someone, you often kind of just pile on every negative feeling and characteristic onto the quote unquote enemy. So from that perspective, I don't think the movie would have been doing justice if they were to completely leave out that antagonistic relationship, and it also wouldn't quite create the arc where when they finally find the woman that they're looking for, John Wayne's kind of internal conflict and not wanting to bring her back because she's been tainted by the Comanche, you wouldn't be able to get a resolution to those feelings from the entirety of the movie if they wouldn't have done that. And I know I went on a huge spiel, but what are your thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I like what you said, and I think that the movie wouldn't make sense, and it'd also be filmed completely differently if John Wayne's character was supposed to be taken as like just fine the way he is. And I think a lot of the movie for me was just showing uh him struggling with that, like with those thoughts, and also like you were saying, how that affected his relationships and how he thought of people. Because he's like you just said, uh his niece, he thought she was somehow tainted now by being raised by Comanches. um his the his traveling companion, his name Mark, I don't know, I'm forgetting it. He was also 1/8, and he always was calling him names and, treating him differently. And, I the ending, I'm not gonna say it now, but it's one of my favorite moments of any movie, and it's what leaves you questioning about his character. And that, I think, kind of ties it all together, and for me, makes me wonder how anyone could interpret this as, just being straight up, this is, they're being racist or whatever, or xenophobic against the Comanche tribe, and that's okay. And I mean, I think another thing people forget is just that this was a huge problem, I think, right after the Civil War. Um, and they really, like, the settlers and the Indians were really just going at it against each other, and there was evil actions from both sides. And I mean, yes, we were more, or white settlers were more advanced and took them out, but it seemed, and like how it's pointed out in the movie with Scar having all those scalps because they killed his sons. He wanted revenge, and it's the same way for the settlers. They want revenge because their people are getting killed and kidnapped. So it's not a easy conflict to resolve.
Yeah, it's almost like gang warfare in a sense. It's like once one person kills a family member or like a close friend, it's like revenge begets revenge, and it just creates a cycle where there's going to be just bloodlines of people who absolutely despise each other and are out for blood. And I feel like, you know, we see it today, but it's not a new phenomenon. It certainly stems from the conflict between natives and settlers. I'm going to sound completely ignorant as far as historical context, though, but this being placed, and I think it was like 1880s, maybe, like through maybe 1870s. It just like it completely repainted my perception of what the world looked like post Civil War. Did you get that at all? Or maybe you kind of had a better idea than I, but I was like, I did not, and I know that, you know, where they were settled is a lot different than maybe like, you know, like Boston or like New York City, but it was just kind of crazy to put that into like a timestamp of this was this time period and this is what parts of America look like. Did you get that at all?
And something I just thought of was, by that time, the people living there, in the various homesteads, probably had, family, for at least a couple generations, maybe one or two, that had already been living there. And so they started probably to feel like that was their land, and they weren't just, coming over and taking it. They started to feel like this belongs to us, which probably added to the sense of, rivalry. Like I think of that one scene where he starts shooting all the buffalo, that he says he's doing that to take, maybe it'll take their food away or something for a while. It's just like a straight up, hatred and rage, which probably, like you said, just fueled from like personal violence among each family. And that just spews, more, oh, they killed, my dad or your brother or whatever, and then that you're not gonna like people if if they do that. So
I felt like also kind of having I think is his name Martin, the travel
yeah,
companion.
it's Martin. That's
Okay.
right. It's Martin.
I feel like having him as like a voice of reason was a really that was a neat kind of take and a neat route to go storyline wise because he was like the person who could maybe bridge the gap and give perspective to both parties.
Yeah, yeah. That is interesting, how he acted that way, and he, thinking back on it, he kind of was the most, I don't want to say him, but reasonable character, I would say, who didn't seem too he had like too much hatred of the Indians built up, um, so that he could try and act, and he just wanted to get Debbie back, and he
He
didn't really have any other films.
exactly, and like you could see that blinding a character, and obviously he was able to overcome that. So like it worked on a character arc for him, where there was like enough growth on his part to be the more patient thinker who eventually prevailed. Theoretically.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to say, and by no means am I like an expert when it comes to this field, but when it came to cinematography, some of the framing, and obviously the setting and the beautiful vista vision, this movie kind of stands at or very near to the top as far as like one of the most beautiful movies ever shot, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And when I was looking at, like like critic reviews and whatnot, videos about this movie, that seemed what they talked about the most. Like the first shot and the last shot being, how he was John Wayne standing outside from inside the camera being inside the homestead, and how that kind of represented like the outside Wild West, and the inside like safe home, and I think the way those two are shot, like the inside of the homestead is, I just love the way it looks. It looks like a painting, like it literally looks like art. Looks like they just kind of colored. Yeah, that's how a lot of Technicolor looks. But the inside just looks like it's drawn, and the outside does in a way too. But like the way that it it's captured, like the they're outside and it's bright, and you wouldn't think they would. I mean, I don't know how it's done, but you wouldn't think they'd be able to capture the like desert to make it look so beautiful when like it's literally sun's out, no clouds in the sky. Like I'm not an expert at lighting or any of that, but that's just crazy to me.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think if you were to try to shoot there digitally, like I'm thinking of, I haven't watched the entire series. I've only seen like a few episodes, right? But Breaking Bad, I feel like there's a shot in the desert and everything looks very washed out, whereas here everything looks vibrant and alive, and couldn't do that without Technicolor. It makes it look beautiful. It actually pops. Whereas I feel like, had you done it digitally now, you'd have to really work against the grain to be able to get a shot that looks anywhere close to as beautiful as what takes place in this film.
Yeah, like I've seen Breaking Bad, like the whole series, and I agree that the desert looks cool in that show. Like I'd never really seen. No, I'd first watched it a long time ago, like when it was coming out. I'd never really seen a desert that much in a movie before, but it has a total different look than The Searchers. Looks more like The Searchers looks more like it's you would see it in some painting or art book.
Yeah.
And you know, the Breaking Bad is kind of like what I would expect it to look like if I actually went to the desert. But I also want to say I think the best shot or my favorite sequence in Searchers is that one, and I'm sure you remember it, where the tribe they're on their horses and the tribe kind of comes and they're riding along that valley and he
Yes.
both of them you see them in the back and John Wayne's group in the front, and that is so cool. Like it's so creative.
Yeah, that's the type of shot that is like just encapsulate of the golden era of film. Like that feels like, you don't base an entire movie off of just let's capture this movie magic and let's just write around it to get to that point. It feels like Ford was like, hey, this is like a perfect opportunity to kind of get a very interesting shot. And if it's the tribe is kind of on both sides of them, am I right?
Yeah, yeah, they're like surrounded, and he's like, "All right, just keep going." And then I guess he has the camera on a dolly or whatever, and it just starts following them, and then you start seeing them surround them as they're riding their horses along. It's so cool.
I mean, yeah, that is literally movie magic at its peak. It was so great. How he was able to capture that was amazing, but to be able to kind of envision that and then put it on film, like, yeah, that was that was my favorite shot of the movie as well. And it was about at that moment where I was like, okay, like all the positive things I've heard about John Ford, like I see it now. And then, throughout the entire movie, I'm like, the guy is just consistently great behind the camera.
Yeah, and another thing like I wanted to add that I think helps make it all work, like the way it's shot, the kind of poetic nature of that along with the dialogue is the music really like makes you, or at least for me, like if you're it helps bring you in,
Hmm.
kind of get completely captured and really feel what the scene is trying to help you feel emotionally.
I completely agree. Yeah, like, a movie like this, it's genuinely hard to kind of point out any glaring weaknesses. I can't, quite frankly. Was there anything that you were like, that's a little bit strange, or that you disliked? Because I would be hard pressed to name one now.
No, I mean, like, everything really makes sense, and when I think of, like, the whole story coming together, there isn't really a scene that isn't, like, useful to the story, but also on its own merit, like, it could be an important, I guess, little lesson or whatever, however you wanna interpret it, its own kind of important subplot, like, just like like I was saying earlier, how he's in love with the wife of his brother. There's not really any reasoning to that, like how this for the plot, but it's interesting own little subplot kind of, or how the another thing is how it years technically go by in the movie, and you see the people changing and how and for example, Martin's girl gets, engaged to someone else. Different things like that. And they all in a way contribute to what John Ford I think is or the what he's trying to present and what you get out of the movie.
Yeah, and it feels very consistent with the archetype of the characters, because John Wayne's character seems to represent the person who he's committed to doing the right thing. He's committed to doing good, and that seems to be like a huge character trait for him. But in doing so, it's like life almost passes him by because he gets so drawn into these things like before he was kind of introduced to this story, I guess like the war had ended 3 years prior, and but he's just coming home, and then he embarks on another like 5 year long journey, and Martin almost represents the character who's able to not fall into the same pitfalls that John Wayne's character has, and he's able to actually enjoy his life after, you know, committing this good deed.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I forgot what I was gonna say. I think I was just gonna talk about like John Wayne's. Oh crap! Can you remind me what you said? I apologize.
No, it's okay.
You got-
It's like he's constantly getting sucked into something like this journey, and it just like it keeps him out of the real world, so to speak. So life just keeps passing him by because he's doing either this for the Confederacy or this to try to save his niece.
Oh, right, right, right. Okay, I remember what I was gonna say. I was just gonna talk about how it's like this obsession that it's framed as like an obsessive search, and it seems to me like it's more uh he does want to find her, but it seems like there's more to this obsession than that. Like that something happened in the war, or he's seen tons of family members killed by this tribe, or well, the fact that they burned his homestead down was a lot, but he seemed to dislike them before then. But it seems like he could kind of is just any rage he has, he's building up and he's just letting it out in this search. And it's not even maybe about uh getting Debbie back as it is just fueling this like drive he has into an obsessive habit. And then like you said, his life kind of passes him by as he puts all his energy into this.
I completely agree with you because I think that's like it's one of the aspects of the film that it was very much sitting back of mind, but it's like when they kind of commented on how long had gone by since the beginning of the search, you're like, damn, like they are like completely obsessed with finding her. Almost past the point of like it's hard to, debate this, but like what would be expected? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and I think of other movies like Taken, that movie, or um Body Double, isn't like ones where someone in their family member gets killed or something, and they're out on a streak for revenge. But really, it's not. They obviously they want say they have a kid that's murdered or something. They're not going to get them back, so it becomes more about avenging them, and in this case, maybe more about avenging what happened to his family and his niece than it even is about trying to bring her back, because first time he sees her, he thinks about, killing her. He seems sick of the whole thing.
Yes, that was the point where I was like, this. There has to be something deeper than that because it's like you went and embarked on this whole journey, and then at the end you're going to shoot her. It's like there's more to it, and it's almost like a battle of culture, for lack of a better term. Between
Yeah.
his lifestyle and the lifestyle of the natives.
Yeah, I think of, this is a super obscure example. And I think of like, when 9/11 happened, and there were some, obviously this was not the majority of US soldiers, but there were some people that went over there with the idea of just wanting to kill, you know, uh Arabic people or Muslim people or whatever, just because it's like they have this hatred inside of them. This thing happens, this event happens that's truly horrific, and then they just kind of want to take their rage, maybe not even from the event, but from before it, out on these people. It's like they now have a new person to blame and someone who is bad, so they can go kind of do that's kind of, I think, the core of John Wayne's character is kind of that like human concept that happens a lot.
Yeah, and there's like, it's almost like on the battlefield it's like they have a different uniform. Well, with this it's like they literally wear different clothes than you and I. That they have headdresses that they're completely different stylistically, and it's like it makes the delineation between you and them, because there is such a difference between a person like Scar and a person like John Wayne. It's noticeable. You can look at each one and completely see that, and it becomes ingrained that it's like they're different. Their style of life, and in his mind, is what leads to them doing these dastardly things.
Right, because I mean, you don't get to know much about Scar as a person, but he's probably similar to John Wayne as an actual human being, even though they're completely different people. You know.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of went into the fact that Scar has a lot of trauma on his side of the spectrum that kind of leads to his actions. So it's like they're not characters that, both sides have motive for what they've done. And I like that it wasn't, even though it can be maybe misconstrued or interpreted as like one side has is the right side and some are the wrong side, but to me I think it does enough to kind of construe the fact that both sides are just fighting for what they think is right.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of in the end, it's like there's not really a right answer of who's right and wrong, and I think that's what we were talking about when we first started, is how like the typical good guy hero movies, one side is obviously right and the bad guys are written to be evil, and they really don't have any redeeming qualities because that they're not supposed to. But the fact that we can look at this movie and I you could see the flaws in both and how they're both similar. And now there's not one evil person that has like any zero empathy whatsoever. It kind of paints a better picture of, I think, how conflicts actually happen and how these people come to have these like what would be considered, like xenophobic or viewpoints where they're putting other people down for seemingly no reason.
I completely agree. And I think John Ford was kind of playing with the preconceptions as far as like stereotypical characters in Hollywood films when he did the character design and even name for Scar, because it sounds like an intimidating name. He has an intimidating look, and he has even like the uh, cliche scar in the face. Like he built like a Bond villain, for lack of a better term. But we get nuance to his perspective throughout the film, where it's almost like he leads you down a direction to think, oh, this might be where he's going with it, and then kind of plays with our preconceptions in the end.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because he does look like a villain with all the typical costume design or names and what how they would write the character, but then who is supposed to be the protagonists are, or at least the protagonist kind of shows himself to not exactly be much different than Scar. And Scar isn't making like outlandish, sadistic decisions the entire movie or anything like that. It just shows him kind of acting within his community, like as a normal, Comanche tribe leader would act.
So, Matt, I want to ask you if you have any final thoughts and what your rating for this movie is.
Yeah. So my rating, I gave this one a perfect 5 out of 5 score. It pretty much instantly became one of my favorites and in my top 25 favorite movies. And my final thought, I want to highlight. I'm not going to say it because I don't want to reveal any more spoilers. But the scene at the end, once everything goes down, and there's that embrace in the arms, John Wade's character, um, and instead of what you would think would happen, that to me is like one of my favorite scenes of any movie. I just wanted to highlight uh, that part.
I'm with you there, and I completely agree. I gave this a 5 out of 5, and I feel like in terms of beauty when it comes to film, this checks all the boxes, and just on that alone, it's something to seek out and watch. But the story is also very compelling. It feels epic in nature and span. So it's pretty much everything you could look for in a great movie. So and makes me want to watch more John Ford films, and I think that also occurred with you too, Matt.
Yes, yes. After this movie, I was super excited about watching more.
The second movie is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. We both chose movies for this video. Matt, you chose the movie that we just were talking about. I chose this one, and it was very much based on the fact that it had James Stewart, who I've come to love from various different Hitchcock films, and then John Wayne, who, after watching The Searchers, I realized was truly a great actor, and it wasn't just kind of like one of those situations where it's just isolated to a time span. I think after watching these two movies, like John Wayne he has to go down as one of the greatest people, because watching him now, I'm like, it still holds up. But regardless, I felt like these two big names would have to just be complete magic on screen, and I felt like they were. And did you feel that way as well, Matt?
Yes, yeah. I watched Liberty Valance the first time yesterday, and I would say it's probably my second favorite John Ford after The Searchers. So you picked a good one, and also Jimmy Stewart's character. Just like you said, I had seen him in Hitchcock movies. Like I loved him in Rear Window, and I thought his character was really good here. And I could also see his character being or him playing this same character in a Hitchcock movie.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, it felt so intelligently written, and it was like awesome to have this character who would not have fit in with the Searchers, or you would have had to get creative as to fitting him in. But having the two dynamics in this movie made the whole interactions between the two just so entertaining and interesting to watch.
Yeah, this is. I mean, I've only seen, I guess, probably four now, 3 or 4 of his Western or John Ford's Western movies, and this is the only one I've seen where they kind of have a character that's more in like the political legal realm, and or more of like a, I guess you would call like an at the time Eastern educated New York Boston area type person. Most of them are just like the rugged cowboy John Wayne type of people.
Yes, so it was like a really neat take on like the fish out of water type setup to have Jimmy Stewart, who, like you said, like that is his archetype, for lack of a better term, in pretty much all of the Hitchcock movies that I've seen, where he's intelligent, he's really cerebral, he's always kind of thinking outside of the normal lanes, and he stands out because of that. And he's quick, he's witty, and to kind of throw him in this Western scenario it really makes him stand out, which is super super interesting.
Yeah, like to be he just seeing him and like his characters are obviously written to this like aspect. It's him like the typical like businessman, like father, like who goes to church, has a family, like just a what people would call like a upstanding like citizen or something that lives in the suburbs. He's just like that. He evokes that like uh, typical kind of I don't know, like a corporate business guy, but in the more so in the 50s or 60s era. Um, that he does it, it's like super believable.
And he feels like very wholesome and very
Yeah.
kind-hearted, which really kind of, I think you hit the nail on the head. He never seemed to try to be exploitative towards the people in the town. He always seemed to give a helping hand, to genuinely try to help them. So like that was just really neat. He almost felt like a Mr. Rogers type character watching this film.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's definitely like I didn't expect him to do that, but you would think if you're thinking, this lawyer guy or this wealthy guy goes to this town and starts living there with a bunch of people that can't read and write, he would be taking advantage of them. And it's just that's not the case at all, which is um it's like an interesting character that they wrote because kind of what we were talking about before, how they're, a lot of the times the protagonist is just a good guy. I think that's the case with him, but the way they, make it interesting is the how the other characters are and how he interacts and they interact with him.
Yeah, and the scenario that he's placed in, his good character traits almost become deficiencies in this wild setting because he's so kind, he's a pacifist, and it seems like aggression is so much at the forefront that it almost becomes a weakness for him that he has to overcome at the end.
Right, right. Like I was thinking, the scene where towards the beginning he gets tripped by Liberty Valance and he has to and they're, John Wayne and Valance are fighting about who's going to pick the food up, and that he's like, I'll pick it up, like who cares? And then, towards the or when he has to learn how to handle a gun. That's he's never thought he would ever need to do that, but now it seems necessary, and the people in the town think he's crazy for not knowing how to defend himself.
Exactly, and people who are like almost staples of the community, like John Wayne, even kind of disagree in his whole philosophy, especially when it comes to trying to teach these townspeople and get them to be able to read and learn about the government and law. Uh, John Wayne, his outlook is that these are kind of unnecessary things and they're not applicable to their situation because of the conflict that they face on a day to day.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's highlighted in that scene where, oh, I forget her name, the character that Jimmy Stewart is interested in romantically.
Hmm.
He's been teaching them for a while, and she's like, this isn't going to be necessary now because Liberty Valance is going to come in here and screw everything up. And it made me think about, how that's in any sort of community, whether they're like in a war or there's a lot of violence, it's extremely hard for people to get educated when there's life threatening things going on around you, like that really are kind of they not more important, but at the time way more important so that you can live. When that happens, I can't imagine how you're gonna learn and get educated because you're so worried about that even if you could, it'd be pretty hard to focus.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, on the hierarchy of needs, it's like your safety has to be first and foremost. So you have to kind of sacrifice certain things that aren't going to, directly impact that. And going back to one of the kind of metaphors or parallels that I drew before, it's like in cities and districts in cities where gang warfare is very common, it's like, people drop out of high school pretty much just to become full blown members of the gang because that is your protection. There's protection in numbers, and going to school isn't going to necessarily help you against your opponents if that's where you put your focus.
Right, right. And also, you're so surrounded by the local area. It's like, what in this town is like the best position I can end up with? And that's if that's your perspective, then you think, well, for the town in Liberty Valance, you think it's being someone like John Wayne who kind of runs the town, but not officially, but just by his confidence and dominance and ability to handle a weapon. It's the same way in whatever community you grow up in. If the who's thought of as the coolest or the most successful is the person. I think I talk about The Wire in this a lot, but like the Stringer's character in The Wire, who's running the drug ring, he's kind of the seen as the coolest or whatever you want to call it, most respected. When in SC, he's literally just a drug lord. Like it's interpreted so differently in different communities. And here in live the town in Liberty Valance, it's kind of like who's fighting to be the best gunslinger, and also who can incite fear in people versus who can protect them is an interesting dynamic.
I completely agree. And I kind of love how that whole dynamic plays into the ending of that. And also how the love interest plays a huge part into the ending as well. So, Jimmy Stewart pretty much becomes like he usurps John Wayne's position, I guess, as the main love interest of the female lead. And it's like I said before, it's a bit of a changing of the guard, but John Wayne's character is so necessary for that to take place. And how John Wayne aids in Jimmy Stewart's character arc is really beautiful, and like the way that was written is genuinely just super creative and really intelligently done.
Yeah, yeah. Like I think I can't remember if I was saying this at the beginning or before we started the podcast, but it's like John Ford himself. I was watching someone talk about him, and he said that he believed John Wayne was the main character, even though kind of is a little more. You see a little more Jimmy Stewart, but that I guess just goes to show how John Ford thought of the movie. And in my eyes, I kind of think that in a way John Wayne's character kind of is, because he's kind of the one that is the changing force in Jimmy Stewart's life. It's the whole town, but he's really like the guy that I guess teaches Jimmy Stewart's character about a lot of stuff, just kind of about life.
Yeah. So just some place setting for those who, maybe haven't seen the film yet. Jimmy Stewart was pretty much whipped and robbed by a man called Liberty Valance. Super well played, by the way, by the actor who played Liberty Valance. Which is it Lee? Is it Lee Marvin?
Yeah.
He was amazing. And he goes to this town to receive aid, and he stays there as a way to pay them back for keeping him there, letting him stay there, letting him eat there. And it just so happens to be the town that Liberty Valance is from. and it creates this huge conflict where Jimmy Stewart is kind of getting sucked into conflicts that put him head to head directly with Liberty Valance until it literally comes to a head. And without John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart's character would have been just terribly inept to deal with that conflict. But he helps him grow as a person and as a character to at least be able to stand up to himself, and then John Wayne's actions eventually help him conquer this villainous character.
That sounds accurate.
From that perspective, though, it's like you have Jimmy Stewart, who's like so anti anything violent, and then there's like a really great scene before we get to the end where Jimmy Stewart punches John Wayne in the face, and that was just like, that was a great moment cinematically, but also character arc wise played out really, really well, where it's like he's finally kind of starting to come into his own and learn maybe the value of facing conflict head on and standing up for yourself.
Yeah. You just, brought back that scene for me where he's shooting, those or what was it? Jugs or glass cartons or something
I think it
on
was
those posts.
paint cans, because it
That's what it was. Yeah. And then you finally kind of see Jimmy Stewart's character for the first time, like get a little violent and upset, when he hits him. And I wasn't expecting that. And then, he's like, I don't like being pushed around and stuff. And that was like one of the only times you really see him get upset, even more so then, in my opinion, than in the final shootout scene. He seemed more calm in the final one.
Yeah, he almost seemed like, I have to do this more so than I want to do this, when it came to the showdown between him and Liberty Valance, where like he was just really actually upset at John Wayne's character there. And I also think it gave John Wayne's character a respect for Jimmy Stewart, that he stood up for himself there. Did you see that as well?
Yeah, 100% agree. And it's funny because like these characters, like, I don't know if this is like just a universal thing or an American thing, or just like a Southern thing. But I met a lot of people that they have the same kind of attitude as a John Wayne's character, where they're not bad. This doesn't make people bad in any sense, but they're just more, I guess you could say, like hard asses or something. Like they're more tough. They want you to. They're trying to test you a lot so that you stand up for yourself. And if you don't, then they're gonna keep, messing with you or whatever they do until you finally do. And then once you do, they respect you for it. And it's this interesting, dynamic that I kind of had to, it took me a while of, just seeing that happen to kind of realize it was a common way that people act. And I think it's just like a kind of I don't know if it's a cultural human thing or what it is, but yeah, like when Jimmy Stewart finally he does that scene and you see John Wayne's character respect him more, that's just what it made me think about.
And it seems like that is kind of not the turning point. It always felt like John Wayne had an affinity for Jimmy Stewart and, respected him in a lot of aspects. But I think it was very important in going into his mindset as to why he had to do what he did in the end. And I'm not sure if we did we go over like the twist and how all the actions play into the title of this movie yet? And do you kind of want to dive into that, Matt?
I would love to talk. I think I briefly mentioned it, but I would love to talk about it more. Yeah.
So, there's the final showdown between Jimmy Stewart and Liberty Valance, and he is completely outmatched. Jimmy Stewart is to Liberty Valance as far as gun skills. Gets shot in the arm, and Liberty Valance is pretty much just toying with him, and it's like we're down to milliseconds where Liberty Valance has him in his sights, and then John Wayne is actually the man who shoots him, and he does it timing wise to be almost in sync with Jimmy Stewart's pulling his gun, which like as the scene happened, I had a feeling that it was John Wayne who did it, but the way that they played it out was like just so expertly done, I thought.
Me too. I think it was brilliant because those scenes, like you're totally as a viewer, at least if you've watched enough American movies, because it's pretty typical where you have the underdog character fighting the villain, and then the hero steps out at the very last second and shoots him or whatever, saves the day. But the way they did it here was, at least I also had a feeling. I was thinking, where's John Wayne's character? And then he shot him, and I kind of thought for a second, wow, maybe he did it, but that doesn't seem to really fit with the movie. And then when they did the, rewind and it shows what actually happened, I thought that was a really good way to show that part.
I completely agree. And also, like that actual shot, it felt so in sync from when we see it originally, like a few minutes prior or however long prior. Like it made me think, and I don't know if this crossed your brain at all, but I was like, did they shoot both of these shots at the same time just because of how in sync they were? And I want to get your opinion on that, or if you think it was just really good choreography to almost make it seem like it was completely in sync from the original shot.
That actually was one of the first things that I thought about, funnily enough. Like, I was thinking, when they showed, John Wade shooting him, I was like, I wonder if they had the camera back there where you can't see it and they just filmed both of these at the same time. And I honestly think they probably did because it just seems to flow. I really have no idea. They could, because people, that do these movies, they could do so many takes where they can get it to where I think they like how it looks and it looks almost the same. But just the way it was done, like the way he walked, Jimmy Stewart's character, like kind of walks up those stairs, and it just looked like he did shoot both of those at once. I would think he did.
I would honestly, I would be surprised either way. If they said they shot them at different times or the same time, I would be very surprised and very impressed either way, just because of how well it was done. And what immediately follows that is John Wayne essentially like burning down the house that he had built for the central love interest. And when I first watched it, my take was John Wayne is like almost torn apart that he actually had to kill a man. And like this whole discussion with you has kind of made my thought process on that change. And I'm wondering, psychologically, how did you kind of look at that scene?
Oh, I don't know. Like that, like to me, the whole, like all of for John Wayne's character after the shooting is kind of hard to understand. I think it's super interpretive
Mm-hmm.
because he's not really proud or, happy or excited. But then another part of me thought it was because Jimmy Stewart's character got the girl, that they were both kind of in a love triangle with. But then it's kind of like him in The Searchers. Like when it's all over, he just kind of resigns himself and like goes on his way. And I guess we're kind of left to kind of assume what he was thinking or feeling. It seems complicated. Like I'd like to know what you think about it because I don't know.
I completely agree as far as it being complicated. And like on first view, obviously, like I was saying, like my mindset has changed a lot, and I think now my interpretation of it is like he obviously I think he thought Liberty Valance was someone who it was like a righteous killing. Okay, so I don't think his inner turmoil came from that. I think it goes more along the lines of what you said as well, was that this sets Jimmy Stewart up to get the girl, but beyond that, it's like the town has to go in a different direction, and it can't be with me leading it. It has to be with Jimmy Stewart leading it. And that is what led him to do the action of shooting Liberty Valance. But it also, I think it was the revelation that it's like, I now have to I have to make this sacrifice for the greater good. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, like completely. Like I hadn't thought of that, and now I'm thinking more about it. I think that's like the right interpretation, or the one I would find correct. Because I think he realizes, like you're saying, maybe that his way isn't the right way for the town in general. He's maybe realizing, you know, people change, like things change, like this town needs a change, and even though he doesn't like it and the people aren't accepting of a Jimmy Stewart type person, I think maybe he's starting to realize that it would be better for everyone, and that is also kind of scary to him, because if that happens, he's what he's kind of worked for, built his life around, and the persona he has becomes a lot more meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
Like how we were talking earlier about, how that town's culture is and how people are raised and what they think is respectful and what they look up to is kind of different now, with someone like Jimmy Stewart there teaching them all these things and showing these, or giving these experiences that they didn't have before. And I think that then that world opens up to just being able to read and write things. A lot of change is going to happen, which isn't, people aren't going to like that.
I completely agree. And I think it comes with like a depression that it's like, things are going to pass me by now. My strengths aren't the strengths that are needed, and life is passing him by again, a la Searchers, like you brought up. The one thing that I do love is how the narrative is told, where it's like it's almost the eulogy for the character of John Wayne, which feels apropos, or appropriate rather, because it's like those actions were ultimately the ones that took him out of the spotlight to where he couldn't be the same person he was before after this, and everything evolved and passed him by. And it was in a way a eulogy. That whole story, it was like the death of the good guy, the good gun in the wild wild west. And but it's also like amazing to see the reverence that Jimmy Stewart and his now wife kind of hold for him in the retrospective of talking about what he did. And I loved that about this movie.
Yeah, and I kind of just came to this point since we've been talking about these two films, but these John Ford movies both seem to be like this. He seems to, I guess, like telling stories about like a mythical kind of person, and events that occur, and at the same time, like it's so much more. It's like a really good plotted story, but he tends to say a lot of these things about like bigger than a life kind of observations, just about communities, people, life, get aging, all these different things that we're taking out of these films that are really about, really just about like a menace in community and Liberty Balance, and warfare, or whatever, Western warfare, and the Searchers. But is like so much more to unpack. I think it's super interesting.
Did you feel like the modern day setting that there was some, I don't know, maybe nostalgia is the right word, of what the town was like prior to it kind of evolving after the fact?
Yeah, yeah, and but I think it's it's like there's not it's not like you could say it's worse or better. I mean, because you think before, they weren't literate, and after, let's say, they all eventually, are getting educated, and they're more involved in the political process. There's more, rational people running for that. It's not like a threaten, like, you vote for me or else type of deal. So you see like them be liberated a lot in like the way they can think and like talk about things, but also like there's always the old way, and I think people in general just tend to like how things were because I don't know, I think that's just like a facet of how people think just about almost everything.
Yeah, I think people often look upon the past with rose-colored glasses, and I think we get some of that from the mindset, especially how the movie starts with Jimmy Stewart's wife going back to the house that John Wayne was building for her, and looking at the cactus roses, where it's like there's a yearning for the simpler time and the things that were important, years ago.
Yeah, yeah, and so and I guess like you just said, like there's no like because I obviously everybody pretty much has nostalgia for their life, and so when you look at stuff like that, you think of all the great times and what that represents to you, but then also you forget about stuff like when Liberty Valance was shoot or basically running the restaurant or bar, the place they all frequented, and shooting his gun around, and the bad stuff like that. You tend to not think about the worst stuff unless you think hard about it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And this type of story, I think, it's one that a western can tell pretty well, most fleshed out, and you can put a lot of thought into how it goes from the wild, wild west and kind of progresses from there. And it was really great to kind of get to see the deep roots of it from the searchers to the man who shot Liberty Valance, where it would progress. So overall, it was just like these were two great movies to watch for John Ford.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, they're my favorite John Ford movies I've seen, and I think if you want to start with westerns, I would say these two, you know, are a perfect place to start.
Would you crown John Ford as like the king of westerns as far as directors go, or do you look other places? Do you find spaghetti westerns to kind of be like the people who took it the furthest or the best, or what's your outlook on that as you've begun to kind of divulge into the western genre?
Well, I mean, I'm still definitely at the beginning of my, I guess, viewing experience for the Western genre. I've probably still seen maybe close to 10, but less than 10 of them. And I've actually still need to see like spaghetti westerns. I can't think of what, like, I haven't seen the Sierra or Sergio Leone trilogy. There's this one called Tampo Poo or Popo or something. It's like this Japanese one. There's a lot of like spaghetti westerns I'm interested in, but that's another, I guess, subgenre of the western I need to see. So honestly, in terms of westerns, besides John Ford, the only ones I've really seen have been from other directors who have dabbled in like tons of genres, and that's kind of their western movie or whatever you want to say. And I'd say the only person I've seen who's made a or the only director I've really watched that's made a lot of westerns is John Ford. But I mean, in my eyes, so far he's the king of it. But I do want to see, if there's any other directors that focus just on westerns. I actually am pretty ignorant of that. I don't really know any.
One thing that I want to say, and I think from previous conversations you might be able to relate, was I had a lot of misconceptions about westerns that stopped me from watching them a lot sooner. And it really took you to kind of push me to actually watch them, and I've enjoyed them so much that looking back I can't even think what my preconceptions were and what stopped me from watching them. I think maybe I didn't think it would be able to be relevant to me now, but I do find that the character arcs are so compelling and they do feel relevant in a strange way. I mean, what can you speak to maybe what some of your preconceptions that kept you from watching them were, and how John Ford and other Western directors were able to I guess kind of prove them to be wrong?
Yeah, sure. So like I kind of thought the similar as you. Like I was like, I'm not gonna relate to these. Like I also don't really care about watching people have shootouts in a desert. It just doesn't like I like action movies, but they're also I've never preferred them as my number one favorite either, but I tend to also I do like them. Nothing against them. And I kind of thought this is like an unrelatable kind of dated like adventure movie, and I that just didn't sound like something I'd like. But when I watched it, I realized that so many big like fun stories are like basically westerns in a different like shape, like Star Wars. Like and I actually read that Star Wars that George Lucas took a lot, or not a lot, but a big part of the story, like the I forget if it's episode 2, where Luke returns back home and like his home's destroyed. Apparently, that whole plot line of that invasion while he's gone and is from the Searchers, which I thought was interesting. So
Oh
there's a
wow.
I yeah, so I started seeing how a lot of modern movies like sci-fis are kind of just Western storylines with all the intricacies of the characters and different stuff, like in a modern presentation, like whether it's like in space or some other type of environment. I realized that they're the same sort of stories. You just got to have fun with the time period and the outfits and like the gunslinging stuff. That's just like a minor part that helps like play or helps contribute to the bigger kind of story that's usually the most interesting part.
I completely agree. It's all just kind of place settings. You're or, like little trinkets to add, flesh out the world that you're in and give characters kind of something to add to who they are, give them something interesting within the story. But at the end of the day, it's like the story being told isn't, it's not too cliched or even like, I don't know how exactly to describe it, but it's not all just the same tropes over and over again. The Western is so deep just from these two movies that you can see like it can be the setting in which so many different stories are told, and it can be done well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think they might get a bad rep because I think they were known back in this 40s 50s time period as kind of being like comic book movies or something now where there's just so many of them to where only some of them are good, and so they kind of all get a bad rap. You know what I mean?
No, I can totally see where you're coming from there. And that's a really interesting perspective, because like you said, now comic book movies are kind of flooding the market, and people kind of paint them all with the same brush because of that. And that's a really interesting take to be able to give a modern sensibility to what has kind of painted westerns and our perspectives now. And I think you're right on the money there, and I think it gives credence to the fact that it's like, look, there are so many gems within the genre that you are discounting if you paint with the same brush again.
Yeah, yeah, and I think people will probably look back to, 50 years from now, and they might say the same thing about the comic book movies. There might be like a few like that people think are like classics, but then there's so much that no one even knows about because they're just kind of forgotten.
Absolutely. Matt, any final thoughts on The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and what was your rating for this?
My rating for this was a 4 out of 5 stars, and my final thoughts. Um, I think this has the. It's hard to say comparing it to The Searchers, but I guess I could say both these movies and this one especially had me thinking a lot at the very end. Right when it ends, they both have really good climax and resolutions to their stories. So I think that was something that really stood out to me here.
Yeah, I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5, and I feel like as far as writing goes, I give the nod to The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I feel like it slightly edges out The Searchers, just because of how things tied into the ending and how character arcs were done. But the beauty of The Searchers was just, it was on a complete other level, to where I gave the overall nod as far as preference to The Searchers, which makes me kind of want to mention that and get your perspective, because black and white can be done and it almost adds to the film in a lot of senses, but having seen Technicolor done by John Ford first and then black and white, part of me wants to say I think this film may have benefited by being done in Technicolor, but I could be dead wrong on that, and I would kind of like to get your perspective on that.
I see what you're saying, like, because I watched the Revalance yesterday and rewatched The Searchers today, and it does. There's just a huge difference in the way it looks. Obviously, because the color, but like that adds so much more to The Searchers, and I don't see why it couldn't have to Liberty Valance. Except I feel like, and this is probably because it was probably like first he said we're gonna film this in black and white, or we're gonna film this in color, and then because it's in color, we're gonna have so many more of these cool outdoor color scenes, and then in Liberty Valance because it's non-color, we're going to keep it more to the town kind of set or whatever. But I don't see why he couldn't have, or why Liberty Valance couldn't have been in color, because I feel like John Ford, most of the ones I've seen from him have been in black and white. But I feel like seeing him deal with how the color works, he can really make it look so much like a painting. Maybe it's just too much. It was just too much effort, or taking too much time for him to figure out the colors, that he just wanted to do it in black and white because he was more comfortable. I don't know, but yeah, I don't think that it really adds anything to it like a horror movie does.
Yeah, I think we're looking at it the same way. Like there was no glaring positive as to why black and white was the preferred kind of choice, and I would be super interested to see if someone could color this with Technicolor after the fact and kind of see how rich the environment looks. So I mean that would be something that would be really, really neat. But what you said also makes a lot of sense, where like a lot of it was isolated to the town, and there wasn't that like that background that would look beautiful, behind every single scene. So I can kind of see maybe where John Ford's mind was at when he decided between color and black and white. So I think you brought up a really, really good point.
Yeah, yeah, like the outdoors is definitely more emphasized in the Searchers.
Oh, absolutely. And it makes the canyons, the sky, the sun, and even there was, I think, a few scenes that were set in like a snowy environment, and he made that look
Yeah.
beautiful as well. So, like, man, I mean, just everything about that film, I honestly, I can't, I can't say enough about how beautiful it looked, but he made everything just look picturesque.
Yeah, yeah, that's the magic of him, I think, combined with that Technicolor process.
So, Matt, I think from our discussions, we're going to be continuing westerns at least for another week, if that's all right with you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm definitely down for that.
All right, awesome. John Ford overall, I have to recommend. Definitely, these two films I think would be loved by any fan of cinema. But are there any other ones that you'd want to kind of make note for people to check out?
Definitely, this movie called 40 Guns is pretty good. But another one that I love, I might have mentioned it earlier, was Rio Bravo. It
Mm.
was like the first one I watched that made me go, okay, westerns can be really good and interesting. And then I moved to John Ford. So I check Rio Bravo out. It's another, I think, really well done western movie.
And have you watched any of Clint Eastwood's westerns? Because he's almost as big, if not bigger, than John Wayne as far as his impact in the western genre.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you mentioned him because I probably sound dumb now, not as having mentioned him as another Western guy, because he's pretty much, in my mind, that you mentioned him, he's probably the most famous one. But no, I think I've seen a movie or two directed by him, but they weren't Westerns.
Yeah, because a lot of his movies outside the western genre are also like spectacularly done. Even some of his more modern ones, like Million Dollar Baby, is one that I've seen that I really enjoyed. And I'm not sure, is Dirty Harry? I know he's the lead, but did he direct that one as well? That's another one that I really enjoy.
Oh no, I actually was meaning to watch, or I wanted to watch Dirty Harry the other week, but no, that's not directed by Clint Eastwood. He's just, I think, the main character.
Oh, okay. Well, one that I believe is directed by him, and he's the lead, and it's a tremendous western that I would recommend is Unforgiven. If you haven't seen that, I would definitely check it out, especially as your appreciation for westerns grow. But there's so many that he's the lead of. The Sergio Leone films, like you mentioned, but also ones directed by him that I also haven't seen, like The Outlaw, Josie Wales, White Plains Drifter, or is it Paleface Drifter? I'm not 100% sure, but obviously, I mean, he's put a huge stamp on the face of westerns and is a huge character throughout its lineage.
Yeah, I would say, I guess him. I guess he's like a little bit more modern, like a John Wayne, just being like the face of Western for his time period.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe that'll be something to check out, but for our next episode, that is. But we'll discuss which westerns we want to watch next, and I'm already excited because you know these two films have left a noticeable impression on me and really completely changed my outlooks on westerns as a whole.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. And bring up Clint Eastwood. I kind of just started looking through his stuff, and I'm more excited to get more into them.
Absolutely. Well, hey Matt, thank you for joining. If anyone who's looking to find, the movies that Matt watches, his reviews, and his ratings, follow him on Letterboxd. It's going to be down in the description below. I appreciate you guys listening to this, and subscribing, listening to the podcast, or watching the YouTube. And again, Matt, thank you for joining me, man. It's always a pleasure to get to speak to you about movies, and this was a really great discussion from my perspective.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I always, love getting on here and discussing movies. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. That is all from us. Thank you again for joining us, and we will catch you on the next episode.